On the night of January 3rd, at the very start of the new year, China's most dangerous hiking route hit the headlines again. 5 hikers attempted to cross the Alai line, 3 of them didn't make it back, and the youngest was only 19 years old. After receiving the emergency call, the Xi'an Chenxi rescue team was quickly assembled and rushed to the mountains. But what awaited them was far more challenging than anyone expected. First, a snowstorm covered the whole sky. The temperature had dropped to deadly levels. And the worst part, none of their foes had any signal. They turned it off themselves. So it was like trying to find a diamond in the middle of a desert. Now you might wonder, why would they do that? Why cut off their lifeline? Follow me, and you won't believe what actually happens and what had happened on this trail. The Alai line is a high-altitude ridge route in China's Qinling Mountains. It connects Mount Ao and Mount Taibai. While the straight line distance is just over 40 kilometers, the actual route stretches for more than 170 kilometers, with most of it sitting above 3,000 meters in elevation. To complete the full crossing, hikers have to traverse 17 mountain peaks in a row, all while dealing with rapidly changing and often extreme weather. All that challenge had drawn in countless adventurers, all wanting to prove they can conquer it. But this ridge is also known as a gate to hell. Since 2002, more than 23 people have lost their lives there. And the worst part is, when something goes wrong, rescue becomes incredibly difficult, sometimes nearly impossible. Because of this, in 2018, authorities officially banned all crossings of the Alai line. But as you probably know, danger itself can be a hook. Despite the ban, people still stick in to challenge themselves. And one of them was the main figure of today's story, an outdoor blogger known as 蟒蛇过江. His name literally means a fierce snake crossing a river, so let's just call him Snake. On August 12, 2024, Snake grabbed his mountain bike and quietly entered the Alai line through a remote trailhead. Before setting off, he noticed a missing person notice posted at the village entrance, warning people about how dangerous the mountain was. Still, it didn't stop him. What he didn't expect was that this journey would turn out to be far more disturbing than he could have imagined. At first, Snake seemed unusually lucky. During the first half of the ride, the weather was crystal clear. Streams, dense forests, and mountain ridges blended together so peacefully that he gradually forgot just how dangerous this place can be. Then, as he reached a narrow section of the trail, something caught his eye. A bright yellow tent stood alone in the middle of the path. Well, he felt confused. Who would camp here? Was someone in trouble? He pushed his bike forward and approached, thinking he might be able to help. But as he got closer, something felt wrong. A foul smell seeped out from the tent, and flies crawled across its surface. At that moment, alarm bells went off in his head. Goosebumps ran across his skin. Still, he clenched his teeth, picked up a stick, and carefully pulled the tent open. A badly decomposed male body. The sight completely stunned him, and then he realized something even more horrifying. The man looked familiar. It was the same missing hiker Snake had seen mentioned before entering the village. Now real fear set in. This was no longer just an illegal adventure, this was about a human life. Snake immediately turned back, jumped on his bike, and rode as fast as he could toward the exit of the mountain. But the mountain didn't let him go easily. Along the way, he faced what felt like endless obstacles. Wild animals, failing navigation, and steep cliffs. At times, he had to shout while riding just to scare off wild boars. Finally, after passing through a long, dark tunnel, he made it out of the mountains and reported everything to the local police. The police were shocked. They quickly organized a team to retrieve the body. Later, it was confirmed that the deceased was exactly the missing person on the poster. He was a 25-year-old college student who had gone missing more than a month earlier. Okay, now the case seemed closed. The victim was finally brought home. Snake, meanwhile, received penalties for illegally entering the mountain. But after Snake uploaded his video, something strange caught people's attention online. A user on Douyin, China's version of TikTok, claimed that he had passed the same tent earlier. He said he noticed flies on it but didn't dare to approach. He only took a photo and left. The disturbing part was this. In his photo, the tent was closed, but in Snake's video, the tent was open. So the question became, who opened the tent before Snake arrived? Let's look at the timeline. The college student went missing around July 7th. The Douyin user passed the tent on August 7th, and it was still closed. Snake discovered the body on August 12th, and by then, the tent was already open. That means someone else had been there in between. Who was it? Why didn't they report the body? Were they still alive? Or had they also disappeared somewhere deep in the mountains? Coincidentally, authorities later found out that another hiker had indeed gone missing around that time. However, that person had already died on July 25th, which ruled him out as the one who opened the tent. So, the mystery was never resolved. And that uncertainty, those unanswered questions, is exactly what makes this story so chilling. Some people said maybe the guy was too afraid of punishment and left quietly, or maybe he, too, was swallowed by the mountain. But there was one final detail that gave this story a human, almost gentle ending. The student's family offered Snake a reward of 100,000 yuan, but he refused. He said he didn't bring good news back, and because of that, he didn't deserve the money. All he wished for was for the young man to finally rest in peace. If you ask me, I say Snake is truly a chosen one, because this wasn't his first time attempting the Altai line. Back in December 8th, 2019, he planned a 2-day crossing in the middle of winter. I know, it sounds crazy, but as a martial arts champion and an experienced mountaineer, he had conquered many peaks before, so he believed this would be manageable. Well, he was wrong. This decision nearly killed him. From now on, everything you're about to hear comes directly from Snake's own account, and by the end of this part, you will understand why the Altai line has earned its reputation as a death route. On December 8th, 2019, midnight, Snake set off from Tangkou village, with Dayehai as its destination. Believing he could finish quickly, he made a fatal decision. He left behind his tent, sleeping bag, and stove, planning to complete the entire route without sleeping. At first, everything went smoothly. After 5 hours, he reached a place called Navigation Frame. During that stretch, the altitude climbed past 3,000 meters. The temperature dropped from -7 degrees Celsius to nearly -20, and all his functional drink felt solid. Still, everything felt under control. I'll be through this soon, he thought. At around 3 a.m., he entered a small forest. At the time, the snow was already waist deep. With every step, branches buried underneath the snow scraped against his legs. He struggled forward, and it wasn't until nearly 5 p.m. that he finally reached the 2800 camp. By then, the sun was setting fast, the temperature dropped sharply, and the wind began to rise. Without shelter and sleeping gear, Snake had to keep on moving. 3 hours later, at 8:50 p.m., he reached a place known as the Pyramid. However, he never expected the wind in this area to be far stronger than anticipated, completely shattering his plan to rest. With no other choice, he continued his journey. But there was one piece of good news. This area had signal, which meant he could call for help. But as a seasoned adventurer, Snake didn't believe he had reached its limit. He ignored the chance to call for help, and that decision would haunt him. Battling the storm, Snake eventually arrived at Tower 1. By sheer luck, he found a narrow crack between the rocks that could provide temporary shelter. Without hesitation, he squeezed inside. But the wind was far stronger than he had imagined. After 4 hours of exposure, he could no longer endure the cold and had to make a desperate choice. Either climb Tower 1 with his bare hands or freeze to death where he was. In the darkness, guided only by a dim headlamp, he climbed along the rock face, using techniques he normally wouldn't dare to attempt. At 4 in the morning, he finally made it up. But the climb had drained nearly all of his energy, pushing Snake's body to its breaking point. That's when the hallucinations began. He saw tents scattered across the snow, but every time he approached, they turned into cold, lifeless rocks. Worse still, his body seemed to act against its own will. Whenever he spotted a higher ground, he felt an uncontrollable urge to climb it. But once he reached the top, he had no idea why he was there. Just as Snake was confused, he saw a female hiker walking ahead of him, guiding him forward. So there was another hiker. Excited, he followed without hesitation until he checked his GPS and realized she was leading him in circles. Snake snapped back, disbelief flooding him. Looking around, he saw no one, not a single footprint. The woman was a hallucination, and he had wasted an entire hour chasing that untouchable hope. I can't waste any more time, he thought. Tower 2 is my only chance to survive. I have to climb it. However, Tower 2 was even more unforgiving than Tower 1. There was no margin for error. You either made it up or you died there. At around 8 a.m., Snake finally made it to the top. By then, his mental state was severely compromised. His eyes were weakened, thoughts were slow and scattered. But lucky for him, the sun was finally up. And in the distance, he could clearly see 九重十海, the famous Stone Sea. With a clear destination ahead, a spark of motivation returned. 九重十海 is a unique geological formation admired by everyone who has seen it. But for Snake, it wasn't just a landmark. It was a sign of survival. He hurried forward, eyes fixed on the distance, and just then, a pavilion emerged from the white snow, a small but welcome sign that it was near the scenic area. At the same time, the faint sound of camel bells drifting through the air, and 3 hikers stood beside a green tent, waving at him and shouting, "I'm saved." That was the only thought in Snake's mind. Excited beyond measure, he shouted back and forced himself forward, pouring every last ounce of energy into each step. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours, but none of that mattered anymore. Just a little further, he thought, then I can finally rest. He was overjoyed. Before entering the camp, he even scooped up a handful of snow and washed his face, a small gesture as if to give this journey a proper ending. But when he got closer, the camp was empty. No people, no voices. No, they must be hiding, he told himself. This is a restricted area. They probably think I'm a patrol. Clinging to that hope, Snake began searching for traces of them. As he did so, he climbed another 200 meters. When he turned around, he froze again. The hikers were back. Same place, same gestures, still waving at him. At this point, a rational person would have understood what was happening. But Snake was already too close to collapse. One thought dominated his mind. Without a tent, I won't survive tonight. No matter what, I have to find them. This is my only chance. So he turned back again. Of course, when he reached the camp, there was still no one there. That was when Snake finally accepted the truth. Everything had been a hallucination. From the female hiker who guided him earlier to every other person he had seen on this route, none of them were real. No one was coming to save him. Snake emptied his mind, warning him again and again, no matter what you see or hear, it's all fake. All you need to do is climb. Soon enough, he pushed upward. At the top, surrounded by countless rocks, he walked cautiously, step by step, and occasionally, when he looked up, he could see what seemed like a sandy clearing in the distance, with vehicles waiting for him. He hesitated. He knew it was all just hallucinations, but what if it was real? What if his friends came to save him? He ran toward it. But once again, only snow and stones. He turned and spotted another tent nearby, but as he approached, it became nothing more than a massive rock. From that point on, Snake wandered aimlessly, looping through the same area over and over until a sudden blast of freezing wind jolted him awake. His gloves were torn, full of holes, and he was dressed only in thin clothing. Yet he had no memory of putting them on this way. To make things worse, he believed he had already gone down the mountain, and he began to doubt that any of what he was saying now was real. Instinctively, he dialed the emergency number. Of course, there was no signal. He then sent a message to his friend, perhaps the last thing he would ever leave behind. But it was all in vain. By then, it was after 6 p.m. on December 9th. Snake had been awake for over 42 hours. He put on every layer he had and descended to the right until he reached the snow pit surrounded by massive rocks. Then night fell, and the moon rose. But something was wrong. The moon was green, swaying in the sky. In that moment, Snake finally knew his body was breaking down and his mind had begun to betray him. This might be his last night. He hid in the small pit, gathered branches to insulate himself from the snow, and spent the entire night jumping in place, the only way to keep himself warm. At 7 a.m. on December 11th, daylight returned. Snake stared at the sky, disoriented. Is this another hallucination? Am I already dead? Sunlight fell on his body, warming him. This time, it felt real, truly real. He opened his backpack and ate the one last Snickers bar. Strength slowly returned, and his mind began to clear. He was really alive. With that mindset, he pushed forward in one final effort. Along the way, he saw familiar faces, friends calling out to him, urging him to turn back. Snake ignored him. He kept going. At around 4 p.m., he finally reached Daye, but there was still no people around. Only one wooden cabin was open. He didn't hesitate. He dragged 5 or 6 quails inside and collapsed into sleep, sleeping for 16 straight hours. Even then, he woke up repeatedly in panic, terrified that he might still be trapped in the mountains, that everything was just another dream. On the morning of December 11th, Snake set off from Dawendong Temple and followed the scenic road downhill. By then, his physical condition had begun to recover, but the damage was undeniable. His feet were severely frostbitten, completely numb until now, and every step sent waves of pain through his legs. He forced himself onward, each step a battle between exhaustion and willpower. At last, he encountered the park security. Only then did the full weight of what he had survived hit him. But the aftermath of that ordeal didn't end with his rescue. The psychological impact it left on Snake was long-lasting. In the first month after his rescue, every time Snake replayed the experience in his mind, fear would wash over him all over again. To him, those hallucinations didn't feel fake. They felt real. And the more he thought about it, the more his mind began to accept the idea. And soon, the nightmares followed. Again and again, he dreamed that he was back on the mountain. He would open his eyes, and all around him was endless white snow, quietly waiting for him to die. When he woke up, he started questioning whether he had truly survived at all, whether he had already died on that mountain and become one of the wandering shadows he thought he saw. And that is Snake's entire story. You may be reminded of the tragedy on Mount Kawagebuo. The two are eerily similar, and together they serve as a warning repeated again and again. Never try to pit a fragile human life against the power of nature. To close, I like to quote a line from a computer game. Cyber hiking the Alai line. You conquered Dragon's Ridge, and you conquered yourself. But remember, the mountain god merely chose to spare you for now.